On a late night at a quiet pharmacy, a black nurse stops to buy medicine for her sick son waiting in the car. But their peaceful night turns brutal when the cashier grows suspicious and calls two police officers. What starts as mocking words quickly escalates into violent actions. But just as their lives hang in the balance, a pair of headlights cuts through the darkness, and the moment her husband steps out of the vehicle, those officers are about to regret picking the wrong family to harass. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. It was just past 10 on a Thursday night in Grey Ridge. The streets were mostly empty, except for the occasional flicker of headlights gliding across rain-slicked pavement. A gentle mist fell, too light to need wipers, but just enough to blur the edges of street signs and turn everything a soft silver under the glow of old yellow street lamps. Renee Carter pulled into a small parking lot beside Maple RX, the only 24-hour pharmacy still open on the east side. Her silver Toyota Camry came to a slow stop, the engine still humming quietly as she shifted into park. She sat there for a second, breathing in the silence, then glanced into the rearview mirror. In the back seat, her son Malik, barely 9, was curled up under a light blanket, eyes half-lidded. His breathing was shallow. His hoodie was zipped up tight, and the warm mist had already started to fog up the windows. His inhaler lay beside him on the seat like a lifeline. He hadn't needed it yet tonight, but Renee knew that could change at any moment. She reached into her pocket for her wallet and whispered without turning her head, "I'm gonna grab that cough medicine, 2 minutes. You okay, baby?" Malik blinked slowly and nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She gave him a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and stepped out into the drizzle. The parking lot was quiet, almost too quiet. There was no music playing from the pharmacy speakers, no people walking by, just the faint buzzing of a flickering neon sign overhead. Renee's blue scrubs were damp at the hems, and there was a thin smudge of dried blood on her left sleeve, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. She hadn't realized it until she got in the car earlier. Some patient she'd brushed past on her way out of the trauma unit had still been bleeding through the gauze. Renee had been too exhausted to care. She'd been on her feet 12 hours straight, through 2 code blues, 3 transfers, and 1 family screaming over a misdiagnosis. A little blood didn't even register anymore. She pushed open the door to Maple RX, triggering a soft chime that echoed too loudly in the empty space. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh. The pharmacy smelled of antiseptic and something sweet, like bubblegum cough syrup. Renee headed toward the back counter, where a young white woman in her early 20s stood wiping down the register. Her name tag read Shannon. She looked up as Renee approached, blinking as though trying to place her. Renee placed her wallet on the counter and cleared her throat. "Do you have children's cough medicine? Preferably with asthma-safe labeling?" Shannon didn't answer right away. Her eyes had landed on Renee's sleeve, the smudge of dried blood just above the wrist. Her posture stiffened slightly. Renee followed her gaze, then looked back at her with a tired but calm expression. "It's not mine. I just came off shift." Shannon nodded once, quickly, but her fingers dropped below the counter just briefly and pressed something. A silent signal. Panic button. Contact for nearby patrol. "I'll be right back," she said curtly, turning toward the shelves behind her. Renee exhaled, her shoulders sagging. She didn't notice the quiet alert that had already gone through. She didn't know that in less than 5 minutes, 2 officers would walk through that door. And the blood on her sleeve. The kind of thing that meant absolutely nothing in her world was about to mean everything in theirs. The moment the pharmacy doors slid open again, the sound echoed sharper than before, cutting through the stale air like an alarm bell no one wanted to acknowledge. Renee turned her head just enough to see who had entered. 2 police officers stepped inside, both white, both in full uniform. The older one walked like he owned the space. Thick around the neck, wide in the chest, his name tag read Sir Brent Nolan. The other, leaner with a rigid jaw and restless fingers, was Officer Ryan Briggs. Neither smiled, neither looked uncertain. They scanned the room with trained precision, eyes flicking over the aisles and locking on Renee like a target had just stepped into the crosshairs. Nolan didn't speak to her at first. Instead, he turned his head toward the counter. "That her?" he asked Shannon, voice low but firm. The young pharmacist froze. Her eyes darted from Renee to the officers, then gave a reluctant nod. Renee stood her ground, feet planted evenly, shoulders back. Her voice didn't rise, but it held weight. "Is there a reason you're here, officers?" Nolan walked a little closer, arms at his sides but fingers flexing near his belt. "Got a call. Woman matching your description. Blood on her clothes. Acting suspicious." Renee blinked. Her body didn't move, but her chest tightened. "I'm a trauma nurse. That blood's not mine. I just finished a 12-hour shift. My son is outside in the car. He's sick. I came in to get medicine, that's all." Briggs chuckled under his breath. 12 hours, huh? You look awfully fresh to be dragging around blood." Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the ID badge clipped to her chest. "Grayridge Medical? Must be nice, driving a Camry, middle of the night, with fresh blood on your sleeve." "I don't have to justify where I am," Renee said, keeping her tone level. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm here to take care of my child." Briggs stepped closer now. "Let's see your ID, license, anything else you got." Renee reached calmly into her wallet and handed over her license along with her work badge. Her hands didn't shake, but her jaw was tight. Nolan took them both, glanced for barely a second, then tossed the documents to the side. Her license fluttered to the floor, landing by her feet. Renee's expression didn't change, but her breathing grew slower, more deliberate. "That's unnecessary," she said quietly. "Don't like how you're talking to us," Briggs said, his eyes scanning her up and down like she was less than real. "Got that edge in your voice, like you think you're better." "I think I know my rights," Renee replied. Nolan took a step closer, now barely a foot away. "We'll decide what rights matter tonight." Renee's heart beat faster, not from fear, not yet, but from the cold insult underneath their words. She leaned slightly to the side, eyes flicking toward the automatic doors. "If this is how you treat someone, doing nothing but buying cough medicine, maybe I should call my—" Before the sentence could finish, Nolan's arm moved fast. He slapped the phone from her hand. It hit the tile hard and cracked, the sound sharp, final. It slid across the floor near a low rack of bandages. Briggs didn't move. He just stared at her with his arms crossed, like he was waiting for the next mistake. Renee stared down at the broken phone. Her hands curled into fists, nails digging into her palms. Her voice was low now, steady as stone. "You had no cause for that." Nolan grinned, just barely. "You're getting mouthy, nurse lady." Renee didn't respond. But outside, in the car, Malik was still watching. And inside, something was shifting. Fast. The moment was starting to crack open, and in just a few seconds it was going to break. Renee didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the pieces of her broken phone on the floor. Her breath was steady, but her eyes had gone colder. She wasn't going to shout, that's what they wanted, but she was done being silent. Slowly, she leaned down and picked up her license, brushed off the edge, and slipped it back into her wallet. Then she straightened her spine and turned her gaze squarely at Sergeant Nolan. "I want your badge number," she said quietly. Nolan didn't flinch. "You can want all you want." Renee took a deep breath, her hand reaching into the inside pocket of her scrub jacket. "Fine. I'll call my brother." But before her fingers even found the second phone she always carried, Briggs lunged forward. "Oh no, you don't." His hand swatted the device out of her grip, sending it spinning across the floor just like the first one. Then he shoved her backward, hard. Renee stumbled, hit the corner of a display shelf, and caught herself with one hand. Nolan moved in before she could recover, grabbed her by the upper arm, and yanked her toward the door. "You want to play smart? Let's go take a look at what's inside that car of yours." Renee fought to dig in her heels, but his grip was too strong. Her shoulder wrenched as he dragged her outside. The pharmacy doors whooshed open, and cold night air slapped her face. Her other hand instinctively went up, not to fight but to protect. "Stop!" My son's in there. He's asleep. He's scared. Don't open the car. Nolan shoved her against the hood of the Camry. The metal was wet and cold, her body making a dull thud as it hit. Her chest pressed against the windshield wipers. She winced but stayed firm. Briggs stepped around to the passenger side and reached for the door handle. "No!" Renee shouted, twisting hard. "You don't understand. He has asthma. He's already not well. He could seize." Nolan pressed her harder against the hood. "You should have thought about that before running your mouth." Inside the car, Malik jerked upright. His breaths were fast now, too fast. His fingers trembled as he searched for his inhaler, found it and tried to press it to his lips, but his hand shook so badly he dropped it. It hit the floorboard and rolled under the front seat. His chest heaved. The air in the car felt thinner now. Outside, Renee could see him through the windshield. She could see the panic. She screamed again, desperate this time. "Please, he needs his medicine. Let me go, I'm begging you." Riggs turned back toward her, face twisted. "You want to make this hard. You just earned yourself a charge, resisting." Without warning, he grabbed her wrists and snapped cold metal around them. The cuffs bit into her skin. Malik's breaths came out in short, sharp rasps now. His lips trembled. His eyes were wide. Briggs walked back to the car, raised his fist, and pounded once, loud, on the window. "Open the door, kid, right now." He reached for the handle, and that's when tires screamed across the parking lot. Briggs had just wrapped his fingers around the car door handle when headlights tore across the lot, flooding the scene in harsh white light. Tires screeched, rubber shrieked against pavement, and a black SUV came to a dead stop less than 10 feet from the Camry. No sirens, no announcement, just silence so loud it made the air snap. The passenger door swung open, and a tall, broad-shouldered black man stepped out, dressed in full uniform, hat tucked under his arm, sidearm at his hip, eyes locked forward like he'd already assessed everything in one glance. Chief Thomas Carter didn't shout. He didn't run. He walked forward with slow, controlled steps, his boots clicking with weight. The officers froze. Nolan instinctively shifted away from Renee, who was still pinned against the hood, her arms wrenched behind her. Briggs took a half-step back from the car, hand twitching near his taser. Carter stopped 2 strides from the chaos and lifted his badge holder high. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Chief Carter? Grey Ridge PD? Remove your hands from my wife. Now." Nolan blinked, confused for a split second, then narrowed his eyes. "She was resisting, gave us attitude, had blood on her, refused to comply." "She's a nurse," Carter said evenly. "That blood came from the job she just left. She was buying cough medicine. And you ignored every single piece of that information while her son, my son, was inside this car having a medical episode." Briggs opened his mouth, searching for something to say. "She didn't identify herself right away. She got loud." "She had every right to," Carter replied, stepping closer. "You escalated. You laid hands on an unarmed woman, cuffed her without cause, and now you're threatening to open a vehicle where a sick child is trying to breathe." Nolan scoffed, voice rising. "We were following protocol." "No," Carter snapped, voice harder now. "You were following bias. You made assumptions, you ignored her credentials, and you broke procedure the moment you touched her without cause." Behind him, 2 marked patrol units rolled into the lot, lights spinning silently. Doors opened. 4 uniformed officers stepped out with purpose. One of them nodded at Carter without hesitation. The others moved in sync, approaching Nolan and Briggs with calm precision. Carter didn't flinch. "Sergeant Nolan, Officer Briggs, you are hereby relieved of duty and placed under administrative custody effective immediately. Disarm yourselves and step away from the vehicle." Briggs turned red. "This is insane." Nolan clenched his fists. "You're suspending us? Over her? This is protocol." Carter cut in sharply. "That's what you said you were following. And now I'm enforcing it." The 2 backup officers moved in, hands gloved, unbuckling the belts from Nolan and Briggs. Nolan threw his weapon down on the hood, snarling. "Bitch should have stayed home if she didn't want attention." Renee flinched at the word but said nothing. Her eyes locked on Thomas. He didn't blink. "Keep talking," he said quietly. "You'll walk straight into a formal charge." The backup officers pulled the two men aside. Paramedics, just arriving behind the second cruiser, stepped out and hurried to the Camry. Renee finally broke from her frozen stance, trying to push herself upright, but her wrists were still bound. Carter rushed to her side and gently removed the cuffs himself. She was trembling, not from fear now, but from everything she'd held in. "He's in the back," she whispered hoarsely. "I couldn't get to him. I tried." Carter opened the rear door as one of the medics stepped in. Malik's eyes were glassy, his lips pale. He was holding the inhaler, but it hadn't been used. The medic moved quickly, checking vitals, giving instructions. Carter reached in, stroked Malik's curls, voice soft. "You're okay, son. You're okay. I'm here." Renee leaned against the side of the car, breathing in short bursts. Carter turned back to her and touched her shoulder gently. "You're safe now," he said. "Both of you are." But safety wasn't enough. Not after what they had just lived through, and inside that pharmacy, the camera mounted above the counter had caught it all. The next morning, the conference room inside Grey Ridge City Hall felt more like a courtroom than a municipal office. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, pale and cold. The lacquered table stretched the length of the room like a stage awaiting a verdict. No one spoke. Not yet. Renee sat near one end of the table, her shoulder wrapped in gauze beneath a dark zip-up sweatshirt. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed the weight of what hadn't been allowed to break her. Malik sat beside her, smaller than he looked last night, blanket draped over his lap, orange juice cup cupped in both hands. He hadn't said much. He was listening now, watching. At the other end stood Chief Thomas Carter. He wasn't in full uniform today, just a dark gray pullover and slacks. His face was unreadable. In his hands was a black department-issued tablet, the screen glowing dimly. Across the table, the city's internal review panel sat in silence, waiting. Thomas spoke first, voice clear, level. "The footage was pulled at 6 a.m. this morning. It's synced to dispatch audio and time-stamped by pharmacy surveillance. It begins approximately 30 seconds before initial contact." He tapped the screen. The speakers in the room crackled to life. At first, there was only the buzz of the pharmacy door. Then Renee's voice, calm, measured, asking for children's cough medicine. Then the officers entered. Nolan's voice, pointed, Briggs's tone already laced with contempt. The panel listened in silence as the words played out. The refusal to acknowledge her license, the sound of it hitting the floor, the crack of her phone, the scream when they pulled her outside. Then Malik's voice, barely audible, wheezing. Renee looked down for a second, then straightened. No one on the panel moved. Thomas paused the video. His thumb hovered above the screen. This was recorded on a camera above the counter, motion-synced, unedited. You'll notice neither officer once attempted to de-escalate. No one interrupted him. No one tried to justify. He set the tablet down and stepped back. One of the panel members cleared her throat, a woman in her 50s, white blazer, fingers tight around her pen. "The child? He recorded as well." Thomas nodded. "Yes, on his own phone. He started recording the moment they entered. It aligns exactly with what you just heard." Malik didn't speak. He didn't need to. Renee's voice broke the silence next. "I didn't cry last night," she said. "I was too focused on staying calm. Too focused on making sure my son didn't panic. But when I looked through that windshield and saw him drop his inhaler, when I knew I couldn't get to him because two armed men thought I didn't look like someone who belonged in that car, I realized how close we came to losing everything over nothing." No one spoke for a long beat. Then Thomas reached across the table and pushed the tablet slightly forward. "The footage is ready for release," he said. "Press briefing begins in 1 hour." And this time, there would be no silence to protect the men who abused their badge. 1 hour later, the media room inside City Hall was packed tighter than usual. Reporters lined up behind tripods and shoulder rigs, checking angles, whispering into their mics. No flags, no banners, just a plain beige wall, a single wired microphone, and a quiet tension rolling under the fluorescent lights like static. Chief Carter stepped up to the table and placed both palms flat against the surface. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. "Last night," he began, "2 officers in this city violated the trust placed in their badge. They confronted a woman, an ER nurse, a mother, without cause. They ignored her credentials, dismissed her words, used force without provocation, and cuffed her in front of her son. Then they attempted to forcibly access a vehicle where a child with a medical condition was in distress. The reporters had stopped moving. Fingers hovered over keyboards. Camera shutters froze. They believed there were no cameras, that there would be no evidence, that no one would hold them accountable. They were wrong." Behind him, the screen flickered on. The footage played in real time. There were no edits, no commentary. Just Renee's calm tone. The moment Nolan dropped her ID. The sound of the phone hitting the floor, her screams outside, and Malik's voice, raspy, fragile, pleading. When the video ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Then the questions hit all at once. Is it true the woman is your wife? Was the child hospitalized? What charges are being filed against the officers? Carter raised a hand. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through every word. This is not about family. This is about justice. This department does not protect abuse of power, not under my command, not anymore. Across the city, news stations replayed the footage within minutes. The story trended within the hour. Hashtags flooded social platforms. Justice for Renee, protect black children, Grey Ridge accountable. But it wasn't just noise online. Outside the courthouse, people began to gather. No chanting, no bullhorns, just quiet presence. Nurses still in scrubs, teachers still holding tote bags, grandparents holding toddlers in winter coats. They weren't there to make a scene. They were there to be seen. Inside a corner office in City Hall, Renee sat with Malik leaning against her side, the boy quiet, eyes on the TV screen mounted high on the wall. He watched the crowd grow, watched as strangers stood shoulder to shoulder for them. Renee's fingers moved through his hair absently. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You think they'll really be held accountable?" Thomas sat across from them, arms folded, eyes fixed on the screen. "If they're not," he said, "this city's not staying quiet." And outside, sirens passed again. Not in a rush, not in fear, but maybe for the first time in change. The courtroom wasn't filled with strangers. It was filled with people who already knew the truth before the first piece of evidence was shown. Nurses, still in scrubs, sat alongside janitors on break. A history teacher held her grade book in her lap. Mothers balanced toddlers in their arms, coats still zipped up, boots wet from morning frost. There were no slogans, no signs, no chants. Just silence. Heavy silence, the kind that comes when a community shows up not to argue, but to witness. Renee sat near the front, her arm still in a sling. Malik was beside her, wearing a collared shirt and small black dress shoes. He looked like he was heading to church, but his jaw was tight, eyes steady. He hadn't spoken much the past few days, not because he was scared, because he was watching, because he had already learned too much about how the world works. Chief Carter entered quietly through the side door, not in uniform. Just a dark sweater, slacks. Today he wasn't here as the police chief. He was here as a father, a husband, a citizen. He gave Renee a small nod. She returned it. Nothing needed to be said. The judge entered. The room stood. The trial began. The state called its witnesses. They didn't have to build a case. The video already did. They simply pressed play. And everyone watched, again, as the officers ignored protocol, mocked Renee, shoved her against the car, shouted at her son, and cuffed her without cause. They listened as Malik cried, as he wheezed, as he begged. Riggs's lawyer tried to paint Renee as confrontational, said she escalated, said the child might have been coached. Nolan's attorney called it a routine misunderstanding that went sideways. But then the tech from Maple RX took the stand. A quiet white man in his 60s, bald, soft-spoken. He explained how the surveillance system had recently been restored, that everything was captured, that the footage had built-in timestamps, that the file was unaltered. When Renee took the stand, she didn't cry. She spoke slowly, clearly, as if each word had been rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. "I wasn't scared for myself," she said. "I was scared I wouldn't be able to get to my son's medicine in time, that they'd let him suffer because they decided I didn't belong in that parking lot." Malik wasn't required to testify, but the court played his audio recording. The breaths, the stuttering pleas, the slur of his voice as he tried to speak through tightening lungs. Then came the insults. Nolan calling Renee a welfare queen, Briggs muttering, kids faking it, trying to buy sympathy. And then came the silence. And then came the jury. It didn't take long. The verdict: guilty. On all counts: excessive force, assault, child endangerment, filing false reports, abuse of power. The judge's voice didn't shake. "This court finds both defendants not only guilty but unfit to wear the badge of this city. You are hereby stripped of all law enforcement authority and remanded into custody pending sentencing." Renee didn't cheer. Neither did Thomas. But something broke loose in the room. Not a celebration. A release. The pressure that had built quietly for so long began to ease, just enough to breathe. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. They weren't there to shout. They weren't protesting. They were standing, shoulder to shoulder, facing the building, like a mirror held up to justice. Renee and Malik exited quietly. A few people clapped. One woman reached out and gently touched Renee's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for not staying silent." Renee looked at her son. He's the one who didn't stay silent. And Malik, quiet, wide-eyed, still holding the broken phone that saved everything, just nodded.